Hammerwood was so very much clearly built for entertaining, and music forms a major part of the arts and cultural life, and we hope that the house plays its part in preserving such culture. Not only that, but we have to ask ourselves, why has classical music lost its following? Why is it not taught well in schools? And we're trying to do something about that, because I think we've found the answer why. And Latrobe's brother was Christian Ignatius Latrobe, and he was a composer. And he composed 6 songs, of which we're aware, as well as many other things, but which are really interesting because at some stage I'm looking for a soprano to perform with one of our instruments. That's another story. But his music actually demonstrates and confirms what I've been working on for a very long time, even before coming to Hammerwood. When I was young, I rescued and rebuilt an organ in my parents' house, and I had to find out how to tune it. We didn't have electronic machines then, and I had to do it by ear. And it was as a result of that that I was aware of historic tunings, and it was a performance of Chopin's Second Sonata that woke me up to the fact that the old 18th century organ tunings were still in use for keyboards, including pianos, and appropriate to the piano repertoire throughout the 19th century. And so we here have a connection between research of the 18th century into the effects on the 19th century, and we're able to revise our music with the possibility of needing now to record the whole repertoire, and it's quite interesting. So we have a collection of instruments at Hammerwood which are inherently interesting, that I've put together specifically because they're able to tell us the story of classical music and to perform of all periods, as well as to provide instruments on which to research. And because I tune myself, I'm able to pick up on nuances of the instruments which tell me how they want to be tuned, and that has great consequences. So I hope that this afternoon I might introduce you to one or two things to not particularly thought of before. The harpsichord is quite a neglected instrument, and so I wanted to promote harpsichord music at the house. And this instrument was at a school for many years and thoroughly neglected because it was too complicated, and it was one of the first, built in 1970, to original historic construction techniques. It was built in 1970 by Clayson Garrett to the design of an instrument that's in the Smithsonian of 1745. It's a lovely instrument. Now, what's interesting is that the Fosse piano Fosse, had been invented by Cristofori in 1709, and the advantages of the piano were becoming known, and the harpsichord had to compete side by side with this rapidly developing instrument, achieving greater and greater popularity. And as a result, the harpsichords of the 18th century developed more and more varieties of tone, of which the instrument from which this is copied is possibly the culmination. Let's listen to it for a few minutes. Here we have Alexandra Kermakova, who's performing a short piece by Dakin, Le Cuckoo. In actual fact, it's really rather interesting because a lot of 18th century classical music, French music particularly, was rural, and they were reproducing rural sounds on their instruments. And so you had cuckoos, hens, all sorts of country sounds coming through in the French Baroque composers. So here we are, some Dakar. And of course this instrument is tuned as it should have been for the 18th century. An instrument that's really fascinating is this Stoddart piano of 1802, because when the piano and the Clayson-Garrett harpsichord are next to each other, one can see how the instruments are quite interchangeable. One could easily put harpsichord jacks into this instrument and have a harpsichord. They were virtually the same frame, and the two breeds of instrument were extremely similar. And this instrument is as close to sounding as a harpsichord as a piano can get. It's really, really glorious. We're not going to listen into it today. We hope that you'll come to concerts and so on. However, I'm having increasing problems with the Stoddart because we've got some very expensive work really coming up on it that's required, because you can see this crack here and on this side here, and the force of the strings is pulling one end towards the other, and these metal brackets aren't holding, and so it's got to be detuned, the strings removed. Whether the strings can be reused or not is another matter, so it may need entirely restringing, and this structural fault corrected, glued, whatever is necessary, needs experts' attention. But it's thanks to this instrument and the following instruments up to the 1870s that have actually confirmed some of my understandings of how instruments should have been tuned in the 18th century and the 19th century in particular. Another instrument that is absolutely crucial in the path of tuning is this 1790s barrel organ made by Holland in Nottinghamshire. And it's extraordinarily rare because it comes with 16 barrels, all in their case, all beautifully documented. Some of them have 10 or 11 songs on. The latest was Ma Chère Amie, which was the latest pop song in about 1786. So we know that the instrument was built not long after the 1780s. So it's very, very much the sort of instrument that one would find in a 1792 house. The barrels are really very, very interesting because they're the same model, the same pattern of barrels, the same pattern of mechanism that was common on other barrels and barrel organs that originated throughout Europe in the 1780s. And it's examination of this barrel organ that has given me an insight to Mozart's fantasias for mechanical clock, which are normally presented on organ. And I realised that, firstly, the tuning of this instrument, which I haven't fully investigated yet, is crucial in telling us about tuning of the 18th century, but the layout of the barrels and the ability of the barrels not just to produce 10 tunes, but to go along, winding around 10 times to produce a performance of some 8.5 minutes long or something like that, was crucial in deciphering how we should have heard Mozart's fantasias. So this is another area where the instruments in the house have been and are important for research. We've got problems coming up with this, as you can see, with the leather on the bellows cracking. And so all of these instruments unfortunately need maintenance. They don't look after themselves. Another instrument is the 1819 Broadwood, and this is a fascinating instrument because it was the same model as this that was sent to Beethoven, and we've done recordings on the Stoddart and of this of some Beethoven sonatas. We're going to hear this instrument later on at the end of the presentation in very unusual circumstances, which I hope you'll enjoy. And there's the Emmerich Betsy Fosse piano. It's Viennese, 1854. It still has leather hammers rather than felt hammers, and we're about to do some work on the action with this, hopefully to do performance on it. It's a really interesting instrument because both the famous maker Streicher and Bosendorfer made pianos to this model. Now the connection between Betsy, Streicher and Bosendorfer I don't know, but Brahms adored his Streicher, and it's going to be really interesting if I can find a pianist to do a performance of Brahms on this instrument. These are known as straight strung pianos, in contrast to later instruments where the bass strings crossed the middle of the instrument to increase resonance and actually to increase confusion. And so this is a fascinating instrument. It was given to us by a friend who had terminal cancer and knew that it was an interesting instrument, and so gave it to Hammerwood for preservation and for public enjoyment. It's a very lovely instrument. There's an 1859 Broadwood, which is a concert grand on hire, as it was, to Sir Charles Halley of the Halley Orchestra, and that instrument was most probably played by Clara Schumann when she came to London in 1859. And then this instrument we've just restrung and is particularly interesting. It's not actually 1864, it's 1869. I don't know where we got that wrong, somewhere along the line. And being a cottage grand, it was intended for accompanying in the living room rather than for concert stage performance. And so it's a very polite instrument, not taking centre stage. And you can see in the middle there are only 2 strings per note rather than the 3 strings on most normal later pianos. So having just got this into good playing order, we hope to have concerts on this during the course of the coming year or two. And here we come to one of the most important instruments in the collection. Not only is it rare, but it's important for tuning because it's been an instrument on which I've been able to test different tunings. It's the perfect model, the analogue of the piano, but with only 1 string per note. It's been possible to tune it easily and test resonance and test different aspects of the tuning. And although it's 1897, it's really vital to harps going back centuries, because this instrument overcomes the limitations of standard harps in not being able to give sharps and flats. And it was Pleyel's invention of the cross-strung harp with 2 sets of strings, one going that way and the other going this way, crossing, that actually enabled the piano repertoire to be played on the harp, and was particularly liked by Debussy and Saint-Saëns, who wrote especially for it. But this particular instrument is really fascinating. It was made by Pleyel for Madeleine de la Lapeyre, and she lived at Saint-Hippolyte-du-Fort in France, and her name is inscribed on the capital of the column here, and there are various names on the sides of the instrument, and I suspect that they were probably friends, possibly pupils, who contributed to the purchase of the harp for Madeleine de la Lapeyre. So it has quite a story to it. It came from Cannes, and the friend from whom I bought it had her husband was the director of the Cannes Film Festival, and he was responsible for the building of the new Cannes Film Festival building in the 1980s. And I wouldn't be at all surprised if, of course, that would have been an opera house, and this might have been languishing in the cellars since the 1930s. So I've talked about tuning and experiments, and here are the results of those experiments. Now, I apologise for what looks like something that's very dry, but I hope that I'll be able to explain it to you. This is a visual explanation of sound, and the sound itself doesn't really mean much to people who can't hear it. One can, but it sort of takes practice to know what one's listening for. And there's that old adage that writing about music is like dancing about architecture. So I hope I'm going to be able to get through those barriers. But the scale that we normally hear is divided between octaves in 12 notes, la 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 la, etc. And the divisions are entirely equal. Now, the problem with that is that mathematically it's based upon the 12th root of 2, and that sounds very complicated. It's a mathematical construct, and if you think it sounds horrible, if you think that the mathematics sounds horrible, in actual fact, musically it sounds horrible too. And sound is constructed of harmonics, and so there are various ways in which things can vibrate. Things can vibrate in not just one way. So if you imagine there's a golf ball in your mouth and you hum and you open up your mouth, to different frequencies. So as I sing, you might hear extra notes come in as the air volume within my mouth is able to vibrate in different ways apart from the one way. So the one way is and as I open my mouth, and so perhaps you heard there extra notes coming in as I opened my mouth, the higher notes, and those notes are known as the harmonics. And the problem is that the scale that we use is not related to the harmonics, and as a result the sound is a mess. And so here on the left hand side we have the normal tuning to which most musical instruments nowadays are tuned, and the problem is that, I better explain, here is frequency going up, and on the left hand side of the graph notes of the scale are identified, and at the bottom we have time of the length of time that the sound or that frequency lasts for. Now the problem is that this is in the middle of the scale, and the notes at the bottom of the scale down here, off the scale at the bottom, have their harmonics which fall in between all of the notes here, and as a result we've got all this mess between the notes that lasts and lasts and lasts, and the notes themselves aren't as strong as they could be because they're not supported by the harmonics. Now the Pleyel harp actually has a xylophone in the head of it, which is for tuning, that gives pitches, and when we tune each of the strings to those notes, then we start seeing all of these sounds becoming cleaner without frequencies in between the notes, and we can see some of the notes become stronger. And when I tune the harp to a historical tuning, which I have developed in conjunction with a way to make them more resonant, we can see the way in which the notes now are really well defined, and they're very clean, and because the harmonics of these lower strings are occurring up here actually on the notes themselves are stronger, so you've got more longer red lines. And on the piano, this makes an enormous difference because it means that you can hold down the sustaining pedal. When you next go to a concert, have a look at the pianist and you'll probably see the right foot going up and down on the sustaining pedal as a loud pedal to amplify individual notes or chords, and it's being used just as a kick drum. But as soon as we use this sort of tuning, we can restore the pedaling of Chopin and Beethoven to sustain the sound. And of course, 18th century pianos didn't have strong, efficient dampers. They required good tuning for the inefficient dampers to be able to be not terribly efficient and for the sound not to be muddled. And so this new tuning, which is the old tuning, really does enable us to restore the sound of classical music. And for me, this is the reason for preserving the heritage. It's not just, oh, isn't it nice as a romantic thing to preserve the past? No, it's what can the past tell us for the present? And we have to preserve it so that although we might not understand it in the present, somebody might understand it better in the future. There are other instruments in the house, but this 1885 Bechstein is rather lovely, and the case of it is very, very much in the spirit of the square cases of the 1819 and the Stoddart and so on. And it's on this instrument that we've been giving concerts for the last, well, we've been doing concerts since 1983, but we acquired this instrument in 1985. It's a fantastic instrument, inlaid all over, including underneath where you can't see it. It's quite an amazing instrument, and we'll hear it in a minute. And we'll hear also the 1819 Broadwood, both instruments tuned in the historic, proper, resonant way. So this is a private snippet of a recording that hasn't been released yet, and it is recorded with a singer who wanted to sing with the 1819 Broadwood. I'm afraid that I tuned the instrument the night before, and this was recorded on a film shoot, and I didn't have time to tidy up the tuning before they started filming in the morning, but so there are a few notes that aren't perfect, but you can hear how this singer is singing with the instrument and is holding the sustaining pedal down throughout. I'm not sure that she ever lifts the sustain pedal up. She said that this was the first time she played a piano where the instrument had worked with her in her music rather than her producing music despite the piano. And here is Helen York playing a piece of Bach using my tuning, and I think that the instrument comes through in a crystalline way that perhaps we haven't heard in other recordings before. And so welcome to the instruments at Hammerwood Park and the musical heritage that's in the course of being created and being rediscovered. For me, that's the reason why we preserve it.
David, thank you so much indeed
Well, come and try it.
for tuning my favourite possession, which is this beautiful piano. And the great thing about David's tuning, David Pinniger, his tuning is that not all keys are the same. We think that keys should be the same. Here are a couple of beautiful home keys. He describes it as
carpet slipper country.
carpet slippers. I like my carpet slippers. But when we go out of the door, if we forget to put our shoes on, B major, not so bad.
You can go skating on ice in B major. Liszt.
Okay,
All those arpeggios.
we'll try that. Next, perhaps the winter after next. David has a grounding in physics. Very good indeed. I had a tiny grounding in physics, nothing like his. And he, in his wonderful house, Hammerwood Hall, has 18 pianos, all tuned in different ways. A couple of them not tuned at all.
Well, the important thing about those pianos, it's not just 18. They actually come from different collections, historic collections. So we start off with an instrument of 1802, and then a Broadwood.
Right. Well, show me what's special about the different keys. Just show me how you do it.
From these instruments, we've learned how to tune the modern piano to revisit the classical composers, because Bach was actually exploring the colour of chromaticism in all of the 48 different keys. So here we've got these home keys, as you say. Importantly, we can set up tension in another key, from which we can relax.
Oh, tension, I get it.
Yes.
And that's all about, in music, the travelling from tension to
That's
relaxation.
Right. And the other thing we can do is there are so many pianists nowadays who just use the sustaining pedal as a kick drum, but the old pianos very often had bad dampers, and Chopin practiced on what was known as a pantalon without any dampers at all. How? How was the music not a mush? Well, the answer was in resonance, because in that sound, perhaps you can hear la, perfect. Now these notes, if one's a brass player, as both Ralph and I have been, these are what are known as the harmonics, and all of these are parts of the sound, parts of the tonality. And if I hold down this note without playing it, there it is, and I play the harmonic notes, oh, they sing.
But if it's not in that key, it doesn't work. Show us it not working in another key.
I'm going to go up a semitone. This is chromatic. Now, being chromatic isn't just about going up from a semitone, it's the different colour when we do, because chromatism is colour. So I'm going to play that note, I'm going to press it down without playing it, and I'm going to go on those harmonic series, and the next note isn't going to exist. There, it's died. But all those others we can still hear. So this key has a different tonality, and the Italians call them by different tonalities rather than keys. So listen. Rather, and it's missing that. Whereas when we go down,
so
that has the sweetness.
Why
of that
doesn't
essence.
everyone have their pianos tuned like this?
It was a contrick pulled in the 19th century by the German piano manufacturers. They tuned...
What, makers of play like Steinways?
But no, yes, Steinways, Bechsteins, Bluthers, the whole lot. They put Broadwoods out of business.
As
Ralph's...
my great-grandfather knew, because he was in business in London as a piano maker, and he was put out of business by the German piano manufacturers. And here am I buying a German piano. Is it as easy to do it in your way as it is Equal Temperament?
It's easier because we have...
So you could get all piano tuners doing it like that?
They've become tuning in different ways. Violinists could tune this way because violinists tune to these perfect fifths. And they're used to perfect fifths. Whereas modern piano tuners will listen for that harmonic, and they will get it to coincide with that harmonic from that one, and they'll get those two harmonics to coincide rather than to listen for the beating between these two notes.
Show us a perfect fifth and show us an imperfect fifth, as it were, one that's not quite so beautiful.
Right, so this
Which is the most perfect?
There are 7 perfect fifths.
Show us one of them. that's F to C.
No beats.
Show us a nice, nasty one. One that's not perfect.
Wah, 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 wah. Can you hear that beating? Wah, wah,
yes.
wah, wah. So this is what's known as a tempered fifth. And this tuning has 5 tempered fifths, and the rest are left pure. And that shifts the notes around a bit so that we have some thirds, that are really pure.
I love pure thirds, and I try and get them with choirs, so I make them smaller. People all think they've got to do thirds the same as the piano. When we're in a choir, we can sing in whatever key we're in at the time, and we can make it absolutely pure and beautiful.
And these are pure at the expense of some others which are wider.
But we don't mind if they're going to express different things, as they often do.
And in actual fact, that isn't much wider from the thirds that we're used to with the normal tuning. But with this tuning, we have the ones that are very similar to those which we're accustomed to, but we have these others which are beautifully pure. So
and
in jazz,
you hold that Chopin composed in a way that used the beautiful home keys and the more challenging remote keys.
not just Chopin, but Schubert, Beethoven, Mozart, Haydn, they all did. This was the language of classical music, even up to Brahms, and arguably Liszt as well. It was only when you get to Saint-Saëns where you really got everything that was chromatic, and then harps found that the music was so complicated they had to have 2 sets of strings crossed in order to play the semitonal music.
And I think orchestras followed this lead to think that they've got to play equal tempered at certain times. Obviously the best orchestras don't now, but some of them would have been beguiled by that because they won't have known the physics.
That's right. And in actual fact, when you tune this tuning for use with an orchestra, yes. I did this down in Nice last year, it was amazing. The orchestra they were incredulous because where the instruments cut in was exactly on the same pitch as the pitch on the piano.
Because sometimes it doesn't work. So give me a year when...
In the modern tuning, it doesn't work.
Yeah.
But in this tuning, it works beautifully.
In the year... What was it? Tell me a year when it really happened. Everybody went towards equal temperament in the 19th century.
From the pianos that I've examined, the pianos of the 1850s and 60s can tolerate the unequal temperament, and they can tolerate it really rather well. Whereas when the German pianos came in the 1880s, Bechstein's, for instance, didn't come into London until 1886, and they got the royal appointment, and then Steinway, I think, robbed the royal appointment from them in the 1890s. It wasn't until then when everything was universally as we tune now. But even then, there are people who say, well, the modern method of tuning wasn't actually refined until 1919.
And 2020, David Pinniger leads the mission back to the old kind of excellent, beautiful tuning, and orchestras all agree that those that are going to play concertos will play with pianos which are tuned beautifully in the way that they love.
Demonstrate us some colour.
Okay, here's C major. A minor. D minor. Getting dangerous, E major. B major. Here's an F sharp major chord. See, it's not that, doesn't really feel out of tune to me in that way. Sounds beautiful to me. And now let's go back to the home key. Here's B flat.
Now that note before then, just before I started speaking, it just led on edge, and it said
I'm leading somewhere. Come and follow me.
Ah, yes, because of the seventh.
It wasn't just because of the seventh, it was because of the intervals within that chord. Now, if you go to C sharp major, without going into sevenths, just with the triads, those keys are leading you to return home. They're the remote keys and asking you to come back home.
C'est l'accommodement du bar. À présent, David Martinez.